Today we want to talk about index investing and how indexes are constructed. We see a lot of media headlines and articles written about index investing, but not enough in our opinion on what actually is an index investment and really breaking down the basics so people understand what's available. So a brief history on index investing. Let's take a basic example, the S&P 500. This is simply the 500 biggest, mostly US-based companies put together in one basket. So we can then buy that basket as a single investment. Essentially what that means is we're getting a slice of each one of those companies in one single investment. This became popular in the 90s to 2000s, but it originates back to 1976 when Vanguard introduced the first S&P 500 fund. Since then, we've had the evolution of what are called ETFs, which is another offshoot of indexed investing. Those became popular more in the 2000s, and the origins are early 90s for the first US-based ETF. Let's take a look at a comparison of three popular small-cap United States index funds. We're using these indexes to try to illustrate the difference between one company's holding versus another. So if we look at Schwab, Vanguard, and iShares, we see three very different investments. The Schwab and the Vanguard hold about 1,500 to 1,800 companies within. However, the iShare only holds about 700 companies. So even though all three represent themselves, accurately so, as small cap index funds, the construction is very different. This chart illustrates the difference based on performance. We're not trying to say one is better than another with the chart. What we're simply saying is knowing what you own is very important even in the world of index investing. Let's take a look at another comparison to further the idea of index construction and why it makes sense for you to really understand what you own. One popular idea within the world of index investing is market capitalization weighted versus equally weighted. We'll use the S&P 500 to make this a little simpler. Market capitalization weighted simply means that the companies within, in our example, the S&P 500, will be represented within the investment based on how big they are in relation to the other companies in the index. So the biggest company in the S&P 500 has the highest weighting, all the way down to the 500th company, which has the lowest weighting. This is a basic way to build an index, but it may not be the best for you, as the S&P 500 currently has 5 companies representing 20% of the overall index. So if you own an S&P 500 market capitalization weighted fund, you're really getting top heavy representation as opposed to what's called equal weighting, where the 500 companies are all equally represented with the proportion of ownership. This chart illustrates a very common market weighted index versus an equally weighted index and the difference in performance. Again, not trying to make the case that one is better than the other, simply trying to illustrate for investors that understanding what you own is imperative even in passive index investing. The final comparison that we will do is passive versus factor. And what do we mean by that? Most index funds, when they were created, started with what's called a passive strategy, which simply means that they buy a basket of stocks, they rebalance back to that basket, and there's no ongoing management for the most part. That idea evolved in the index world into what's called factor investing. Factor investing says they'll take an index, again the S&P 500 is a good example, they will use factors to weed out the companies they don't want, and then they will keep the remaining companies. The idea behind factor investing is why own all 500 companies if some of them aren't performing very well? The negative between factor and passive is understanding how the factor piece of investing works. In other words, do we fully understand what factors the company is using, and do we really believe that that identifies the best companies? As opposed to saying, let's own all 500 because historically we will do just as well on that path. Again, we're not illustrating that one is better than the other, simply that you understand the difference when you choose index investments. In conclusion, it's important to understand what we own, not just large company, mid-sized company, small company, international, domestic, but really what makes up these investments themselves. The nice thing is we can look at any number of published fact sheets to understand how our investments are constructed, whether they're passive, whether it's a factor investment, what's under the hood, how many companies they own, what disciplines they follow. All of these things are very important for us to understand. If this is something you enjoy doing and you like the idea of looking at fact sheets, this is something that makes sense then for you to do on your own. However, if you don't like the idea, if it feels like it's too much, probably a good time to reach out to a financial advisor and see if that's the right fit for you.